As the sun barely peeked over the horizon in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, President Ibrahim Traoré made an impulsive decision. That morning, deviating from his official schedule, which included meetings with ministers, he felt an irrepressible need to connect directly with the people. Without informing his usual security team, he announced his intention to visit the Yalgado Ouedraogo National Hospital, one of the country's most important healthcare facilities. A president must see for himself the reality his people live, he declared to his chief of staff, who tried to dissuade him. How can I make informed decisions from my office without knowing the real conditions in which Burkinabé live? Ibrahim Traoré arrived at the hospital in an ordinary vehicle, accompanied only by 2 discreet bodyguards. He wore traditional Burkinabé attire, devoid of the usual pomp of official visits. Upon his arrival, the hospital director, informed at the last minute, greeted him with palpable nervousness. "Mr. President, we are honored. If we had been notified earlier, we could have prepared. It's precisely to avoid any staging that I came like this," Traoré gently interrupted. "Show me the hospital as it functions every day." The corridors were crowded. Patients waited, seated on rudimentary benches or directly on the floor. Some recognized him immediately, their faces lighting up with surprise. Others, absorbed by their pain or worry, paid little attention to the man passing by. Ibrahim stopped several times, kneeling to speak with a mother holding her feverish child, shaking the hand of an elderly man whose eyes filled with tears upon recognizing his president. "We are with you," he repeated to each person. "We are working to improve all this." But his gaze could not ignore the stark reality around him. Outdated medical equipment, shortages of medicine, overwhelmed staff. The paint peeled from the walls, water dripped from the ceiling in places, forming small puddles on the floor. Dr. Ouattara, head of the pediatric department, eventually joined the visit. He was a man in his 50s, his face marked by fatigue but his eyes still shining with unbroken determination. "Mr. President, would you agree to visit our intensive care unit? That's where we treat the most critical cases, and where our needs are most urgent." Traoré nodded, following the doctor through a maze of corridors. They turned a corner, and suddenly the president felt his foot slip on a wet surface. He stumbled slightly, regaining his balance just in time. "Careful, the floor was just cleaned," a female voice warned. Ibrahim turned and saw an older woman dressed in a faded blue smock holding a bucket and a mop. She kept her head lowered, visibly embarrassed at nearly causing the president to fall. "Please forgive me, sir," she said softly, without raising her eyes. "It's nothing, madam. I wasn't watching where I was walking," he replied kindly. He was about to continue when something in the woman's demeanor, perhaps the tone of her voice, stirred an odd sensation in him. An imperceptible shiver ran down his spine. He stopped, observing more closely the face partially hidden under a traditional headscarf. "We should continue, Mr. President," suggested Dr. Ouattara, eager to show him his department. But Ibrahim remained still, as if frozen in time. This woman, her hands marked by toil, and all these years, that profile she persisted in avoiding. Why did it seem so familiar? "What is your name?" he asked abruptly. The cleaning woman seemed startled by this sudden attention. She slightly raised her head, revealing a face marked by time but retaining a certain delicacy. "My name is Aminata, sir," she replied in a nearly inaudible voice. That name echoed in Ibrahim's mind like a distant reverberation. Aminata, such a common name in Burkina Faso. And yet, "Thank you, Aminata," he said simply, unable to explain the unease overtaking him. He resumed his tour, but his mind remained captivated by this brief encounter. Something in that face evoked buried memories, fragments of a nearly erased past, a sense of déjà vu he couldn't define. The official visit continued through the hospital's various departments, but Ibrahim Traoré's mind was partly elsewhere. The image of the cleaning woman, Aminata, kept haunting him like an enigma rising from the depths of his memory. He tried to focus on the doctor's explanations, the healthcare staff's requests, but his thoughts kept returning to that unexpected encounter. As Dr. Ouattara described the challenges faced by the maternity ward, Ibrahim caught sight of Aminata's silhouette again, moving away down a nearby corridor. Driven by an inexplicable impulse, he excused himself from the group accompanying him. Doctor, continue the tour with my chief of staff. I'll rejoin you in a few moments. Without waiting for a response, he headed down the corridor, quickly catching up to the cleaning woman, who flinched upon seeing him appear before her. "Forgive me for interrupting your work, Aminata," he began in a gentle voice that contrasted with his presidential status. "I'd like to ask you a few questions, if you'll allow me." The woman seemed uneasy, her hands tightening on the handle of her mop. I haven't done anything wrong, Mr. President," she stammered, fear evident in her voice. "I know that," Ibrahim reassured her with a smile. "Tell me, how long have you worked at this hospital?" 23 years, sir," she replied, her eyes still lowered. "I started working here after leaving my village." "And which village are you from?" "From Kolweogo, in the Sint Matenga province, in the north." This response hit Ibrahim like an electric shock. Kolweogo. The name of that village instantly unleashed a flood of memories. It was exactly there that he had spent part of his childhood after his father's death. Images now surged with striking clarity. Mud brick houses, the smell of cooking millet, the fields, the women at the well. "Did you know a woman named Fatimata in that village?" he asked, his heart pounding at the mention of that name. Aminata raised her head, her eyes meeting the president's for the first time. Her gaze expressed deep emotion, a mix of surprise and recognition. "Fatimata," she murmured. "Yes, I knew her well. She was your biological mother." Ibrahim felt his throat tighten. "So you knew us, my mother and me?" Aminata nodded slowly, and tears began to well in the corners of her eyes. "I knew you when you were just a little boy, Ibrahim. You were barely 5 when your father passed away." A heavy, emotional silence settled between them in that anonymous hospital corridor. Time seemed suspended. The surrounding noises, nurses' calls, announcements over the intercom, conversations, suddenly felt distant, as if belonging to another reality. Aminata finally continued. "Ibrahim," in a barely audible voice, "were you close to my family?" The woman wiped a tear discreetly with the back of her hand, then answered simply, "I was much more than just a neighbor, Ibrahim. However, this place might not be suitable for discussing such matters." Ibrahim understood the truth in her words. This hospital corridor, where interruptions were always possible, was not the place to unearth such intimate memories. Yet he couldn't bring himself to leave the conversation unfinished. "Where do you live now, Aminata?" "In the Depoya sector, sir. A small house I share with my niece. I will visit you tomorrow if you agree. We can talk more then," he said. Aminata seemed taken aback by this proposal. You would come to my home, but it's just a humble house, unworthy of a president." "It's not the president who will come, Aminata," Ibrahim replied gently. "It's the child from Kolweogo who wishes to reconnect with his past." With that, he had to rejoin the official entourage, continuing the visit, but his mind was elsewhere. While half listening to explanations about the chronic shortage of antibiotics and surgical equipment, one question consumed him. What role had this woman played in his life? Why did her face feel both so familiar and so mysteriously essential? Back at the presidential palace that evening, Ibrahim cancelled all his engagements for the night. He locked himself in his office and dug out an old photo album, one of the few personal items he had kept through his many moves, military career, and rise to power. The faded pictures showed a woman with a kind smile, his mother, Fatimata, holding a young boy by the hand. Other images depicted the village, circular huts, and the imposing trees under which the elders gathered. But nowhere could Ibrahim find Aminata's face. He summoned his aide-de-camp. "I need you to gather all available information on a woman named Aminata, from Kolweogo, who works as a cleaner at Yalgado Hospital. Absolute discretion regarding this request." That night, Ibrahim slept restlessly. Fragments of childhood memories surfaced intermittently, like scattered pieces of an incomplete puzzle. He saw a woman singing lullabies to him, tending to his scraped knees, telling him stories by the light of a kerosene lamp. Was it his mother? Was it Aminata? The faces overlapped, blending into the fog of the past. The next morning, Ibrahim Traoré woke before dawn. His decision was made. He would visit Aminata, not with presidential protocol, but as an ordinary man seeking his story. His aide-de-camp had provided a file with basic information. Aminata E. Draogo, 63 years old, widowed, employed at the hospital since 1998, residing in the working-class Dapoya neighborhood. Nothing extraordinary in her background, except remarkable consistency in a single modest job. He dressed simply, choosing discreet civilian clothes, dark trousers and a plain shirt. Only his driver and one security agent would accompany him, without sirens or the usual escorts. "Mr. President," his chief of staff intervened upon learning of his plan, "may I remind you that you have a video conference with the President of Ghana at 11 a.m. "Postpone it," Ibrahim replied simply. "Tell him I have an urgent personal matter." The presidential car, stripped of any distinguishing marks, navigated Ouagadougou's crowded streets. Morning traffic jams, street vendors, schoolchildren in uniforms. Ibrahim observed this daily life from which his status had gradually distanced him. Through the tinted window he gazed again at his city, its unadorned, authentic reality. They finally reached the Dapoya neighborhood, a labyrinth of narrow alleys and modest homes. The driver slowed as they approached a house built of cinder blocks, painted light yellow, with a small garden where laundry hung to dry. "We've arrived, sir," the security agent said, having located the address. "Wait for me in the car," Ibrahim ordered. "I want to go alone." He opened the metal gate, which creaked, and stepped into the courtyard. A young woman was washing kitchen utensils near an outdoor tap. She froze upon recognizing the visitor. "Good morning," Ibrahim said simply. "I'm looking for Mrs. Aminata Eraogo." The young woman, too stunned to respond, pointed to the half-open door of the house. Ibrahim thanked her with a nod and approached the entrance. He knocked lightly on the wood. "Come in," a familiar voice replied. The interior was simple but neatly kept. Basic furniture, a few framed photos, colorful fabrics draped over the armchairs. The atmosphere spoke of dignity, despite the modesty of the place. Aminata was seated near the window, dressed in a traditional bubu with ochre and blue patterns. She didn't seem surprised to see Ibrahim. "I was expecting you," she said simply. "I've prepared tea." Ibrahim sat across from her, in a silence heavy with meaning. Through the open window, the sounds of the waking neighborhood drifted in. Children's voices, the hum of a motorbike, a street vendor's call. Aminata spoke first. "Ibrahim, since yesterday I haven't stopped thinking about our encounter. There's something in your face that's familiar to me, like a memory I can't fully piece together." The old woman poured tea into 2 small glasses, her movements imbued with calm elegance. "Children often forget," she said gently. "It's normal, alas, but sometimes the heart remembers what the mind has erased." She stood slowly, went to a small chest, and took out a wooden box, worn by time. She opened it and handed Ibrahim an object, a small child's bracelet, made of colored beads and cowrie shells. "You wore this around your wrist," she whispered. "It was a gift from your mother, Fatimata. She had it blessed by the village marabout to protect you." Ibrahim took the bracelet in his hands, like a sacred relic. Images flooded his mind, himself as a child, playing with the beads, counting them one by one to fall asleep. "How do you have this bracelet?" he asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. Aminata took a deep breath, as if gathering her courage. "When your mother, Fatimata, fell gravely ill, I was her neighbor and closest friend. I had lost my husband the year before and we supported each other through our hardships. When she felt the illness would take her, she asked me to look after you." Tears began to stream down Aminata's cheeks, but she continued her story. "For nearly 2 years I cared for you as if you were my own son. I cooked your meals, washed your clothes, told you stories at night to help you sleep. You called me Mama Nina, because you couldn't pronounce my full name." Ibrahim felt his heart stop. Mama Nina. Those 2 words resonated like a key unlocking a long sealed door in his memory. Memories surged. A woman with a warm laugh carrying him on her shoulders, teaching him to identify birds, tending to his fevers with bitter herbal teas. "I remember you, Mama Nina," he murmured, overwhelmed by emotion. Aminata gave him a tearful smile. "After Fatimata's death, your paternal uncle came to take you. According to tradition, he believed a boy should grow up with his father's family. I pleaded for you to stay with me, but I was just a lone woman, powerless. They took you to the city and I was never allowed to see you again." Ibrahim stood, unable to hold back his feelings any longer. He knelt before Aminata and took her hands in his. "You were my second mother," he said fervently. "How could I have forgotten you?" "You were so young," she replied softly, "and the adults likely encouraged you to forget me, to never speak of me again. That's often how things go. But you, how did you fare all these years?" Aminata shrugged slightly. "I left the village after you were taken. It was too painful to stay. I came to Ouagadougou, found this job at the hospital. I lived simply, keeping your memory in my heart. And when you became a public figure, a respected soldier, then the president, I followed your journey from afar, in silence. I was so proud of you." Ibrahim, his throat tight, responded, "You should have reached out and say, 'Hello, Mr. President, I'm the woman who raised you for 2 years when you were little. Who would have believed me? Who would have let me near you?'" Ibrahim saw the truth in her words. The protocol, the security measures, the distance power inevitably creates. All of it would have made such an approach impossible. "But fate made me slip on your freshly mopped floor," he said with a tearful smile. "It's the trace of paths we don't always understand," Aminata replied simply. Hours vanished like minutes in Aminata's modest home. Ibrahim forgot his presidential duties, his meetings, the affairs of state. Sitting in that unpretentious living room, he became simply a man reconnecting with a lost chapter of his personal history. Aminata had unearthed a few faded photographs, images of the village, of Fatimata, and even one or two where a young Ibrahim could be seen on her lap. These pictures, carefully preserved for decades, were her most precious possession. "Every year on your birthday, I made your favorite dish," she confided. "Rice with chicken pieces. I shared it with the neighborhood children, praying for your health and happiness." Ibrahim was deeply moved by this silent loyalty sustained over all those years. "You watched over me from afar. A bond of the heart never truly breaks," Aminata said simply, "even when circumstances physically separate us." Aminata's niece, who had discreetly slipped away upon the president's arrival, returned with a tray of food. 2. A thick millet-based paste, accompanied by a baobab leaf sauce. A simple, authentic meal that instantly recalled the flavors of Ibrahim's childhood. "Aminata talked about you so often," the young woman said shyly, "but I thought they were stories she made up to comfort herself. I never imagined the president himself would come to our house one day." Aminata gave her niece a tender look. "Fatou is like my daughter. Her mother, my younger sister, passed away 10 years ago. We support each other." Ibrahim turned to the young woman. "Fatou, know that your aunt was always a mother figure to me, even if time clouded my memories. She cared for me in my moments of weakness, and gave me the love I desperately needed." They shared their meal, in an atmosphere charged with emotion and profound sincerity. Ibrahim listened to Aminata, absorbed by her childhood stories. His fall into the village's shallow well and rescue by a neighbor. His imitation of the rooster's crow at sunrise. His habit of falling asleep clutching a small blue blanket. Each anecdote awakened memory fragments, gradually piecing together the mosaic of his early years. It was as if a part of himself, long lost, was being restored to him in that moment. "Do you remember the stories I used to tell you?" Aminata asked. "The story of the hare that tricked the lion," Ibrahim replied spontaneously, surprised himself by the memory resurfacing. "That was always the one you asked for," he added. Aminata's face lit up. "You really remember? You insisted on hearing it almost every night, even when you knew it by heart." Ibrahim smiled, savoring this rediscovered connection to his past. Then his expression grew more serious. "Aminata, why did you keep working as a cleaner all these years? Couldn't you have found a less demanding job?" The old woman shrugged slightly. "Honest work is never a source of shame, Ibrahim. I raised my niece, sent money to the village to help my family. I never had to beg, and cleaning a hospital is also a way to help the sick in my own way." This simple dignity touched Ibrahim deeply. He, who had climbed the military ranks, received honors, and wielded supreme power, was confronted with a lesson in humility and nobility of spirit. "I want to do something for you," he said earnestly. "You shouldn't have to work so hard at your age." Aminata looked at him with a serene expression. "You came back to me. You recognized me. You remember. That's already the greatest gift I could have hoped for." Ibrahim shook his head, moved but determined. No, that's not enough. I owe you a debt, Mama Aminata, a son's debt to his mother. He thought for a moment, then added, I don't want to impose a change of life that would unsettle you, but please let me at least improve your daily life, offer you a dignified retirement, proper medical care, and I'd like you to tell me more of those childhood stories, to talk about my mother, Fatimata. I have so much to relearn, so much to rediscover. Aminata regarded him for a long moment, her eyes filled with quiet wisdom. If that's your wish, I accept. But I don't want luxury, Ibrahim. Just enough to live in peace with Fatu, and maybe return to the village sometimes to reconnect with my roots. Ibrahim nodded, understanding her moderation perfectly. He stood, and in a spontaneous gesture, embraced this woman who had been his second mother. The scent of her boo-boo, a mix of shea butter and incense, unleashed a cascade of olfactory memories. It was the smell of his childhood, the smell of safety and maternal love. When he finally left Aminata's house, the sun was beginning to set. His driver and bodyguard, worried by his long absence, straightened as he approached. Everything all right, Mr. President? The security agent asked. Ibrahim looked back one last time at the modest yellow house where Aminata and Fatu stood at the threshold to bid him farewell. Better than ever, he replied. In a simple way, he had rediscovered a facet of himself. Back at the presidential palace, Ibrahim locked himself in his office. Missed calls, urgent files, diplomatic communications, all seemed secondary compared to the introspection he had just experienced. He summoned his private secretary. I want to create a foundation, he announced. A foundation to honor women like Aminata Eraogo, those who raise, care for, and support others, often in the shadows and without recognition. A remarkable initiative, Mr. President, the secretary approved, taking notes. What name would you like to give this foundation? Ibrahim paused to reflect. Root of the heart, he finally answered, because these women nurture the invisible roots of our society. That night, Ibrahim fell into a deep, restorative sleep, the likes of which he hadn't known in ages. In his dreams, he saw his childhood village, his mother Fatimata's radiant smile, and Aminata's protective hands, which had guided his first steps in life. 3 weeks had passed since the emotional reunion between Ibrahim Traoré and Aminata. During that time, the president had arranged for Aminata and her niece Fatu to move into a comfortable house in a residential neighborhood of Ouagadougou. Nothing ostentatious that might have made the humble woman uncomfortable, but a dignified, spacious home where she could live out her later years in peace. Ibrahim had also ensured that Aminata received an early retirement from the hospital with a comfortable pension, securing her and Fatu from financial hardship. The hospital's HR director, initially puzzled by this presidential request concerning a mere cleaner, quickly understood it was a personal matter and handled the file with utmost diligence. But Ibrahim wanted to do more. That morning, an official car came to pick up Aminata and Fatu at their new address. The old woman, dressed in her finest boo-boo in Burkina Faso's colors, was visibly nervous. Where are you taking me? She asked the driver. To the presidential palace, madam, he replied with deference. The president is waiting for you. Fatu took her aunt's hand and squeezed it affectionately. Don't worry, auntie. I'm sure it's a good surprise. When they arrived at the palace, Aminata was surprised to see several ministers, as well as journalists and television cameras. Ibrahim came to greet her personally at the entrance, taking her hands with affection. Don't be afraid, Mama Nina, he said softly, using her childhood nickname publicly for the first time. Today is a special day. He guided her to the grand reception hall, where about 50 people were gathered. Among them, Aminata recognized, to her astonishment, familiar faces. Elders from Kolweogo village she hadn't seen in decades, some of her hospital colleagues, and even the old Marabou who had blessed Ibrahim's beaded bracelet. Once everyone was seated, Ibrahim Traoré took his place at a central podium. Aminata sat beside him, in a seat of honor. National television cameras broadcast the event live across the country. People of Burkina Faso, the president began, his voice clear yet tinged with emotion. I have gathered you today to bear witness to a debt, both personal and national. Behind every leader, behind every man or woman who serves their country, there are invisible people who have shaped their character, nourished their soul, and instilled essential values. He turned to Aminata, whose eyes shone with contained emotion. This woman beside me, Aminata Idraogo, was my second mother when my biological mother, Fatimata, fell ill. It was she who sheltered me, fed me, cared for me, and cherished me as her own child. Later, circumstances separated us, but fate orchestrated an unexpected reunion during my recent visit to Yelgado Hospital. A ripple of emotion passed through the audience, the story already touching hearts. For nearly a quarter of a century, Aminata worked as a cleaner in that hospital, living modestly with dignity and courage. She never sought to profit from our past connection, even after I became president. It is this humility, this greatness of soul, that I wish to honor today, not only in her name, but in the name of all the unsung women across our country who raise, support, and build the future in the shadows. Ibrahim then unveiled a commemorative plaque bearing Aminata's name, accompanied by a text celebrating her maternal devotion and quiet contribution to the nation. He officially presented her with the keys to her new home and a document formalizing a lifetime pension. But that's not all, he continued. In tribute to Aminata and all the adoptive mothers, official or not, who care for vulnerable children in our country, I announce today the creation of the Root of the Heart Foundation. This institution will aim to support women raising orphaned or disadvantaged children, providing them with material resources and social recognition for their essential contribution to our society. Applause filled the hall as Aminata's face streamed with silent tears. Ibrahim then invited her to speak. Hesitant at first, intimidated by the microphones and cameras, the old woman finally stood, adjusting her traditional headscarf with dignity. "I don't have the words of educated people, how do you say?" she began in a soft but firm voice. "I just want to say that love knows no boundaries. When I cared for little Ibrahim, I didn't think about the future. I didn't imagine he would one day become president. I simply loved a child who needed love." She paused, searching for words, then continued with more confidence. "In our villages, we have a proverb that says it takes a whole village to raise a child. Every woman who cares for a child not her own is part of this ancestral tradition. I did nothing extraordinary. I simply followed the path of our ancestors." Then, turning to Ibrahim with a radiant smile, she added, "I never stopped believing that God would let me see my son again. Today, my heart overflows with joy. May God bless our president and our country." This scene, broadcast live on national television, deeply moved the Burkinabe people. Within hours, the story of Ibrahim and Aminata spread across the country, then crossed borders, picked up by international media. What began as a chance encounter in a hospital corridor became a powerful symbol of African family values, community solidarity, and filial gratitude. In the days that followed, the Root of the Heart Foundation received an overwhelming number of donations and offers of support. Women across the country, raising children not their own, began sharing their stories, creating an unexpected network of solidarity. A month after the ceremony, Ibrahim organized an official trip to Kolwego village. It was his first return since childhood. Accompanied by Aminata, he visited the modest house where he had lived with his mother, Fatimata. Then came the moment when Aminata had welcomed him after his recovery, which initially intimidated the villagers by the presence of the head of state, but they gradually relaxed. Ibrahim sat under the massive baobab, captivated by the elders' stories of his childhood. Some still remembered the mischievous boy running barefoot in the red, dusty earth. An elderly woman, with palpable shyness, approached Ibrahim and handed him a small object wrapped in cloth. It was a wooden spinning top, roughly carved. "You made this yourself," she explained, "and you were so proud you showed it to the whole village. I kept it all these years, hoping you'd return one day." Ibrahim took the top, overwhelmed with emotion at this tangible link to his past. He spun it in his palm, instantly recalling the familiar gesture from childhood. Aminata, seated beside him, watched the scene, radiating peaceful joy. For the first time in decades, she felt a sense of completion, a deep serenity. The circle was finally closed. "You know," she confided to a journalist interviewing her, "life is like a long fabric we weave day by day. Sometimes threads break, patterns are interrupted, But if you persist with faith, the beauty of the design eventually reveals itself. At dusk, as the sun set the horizon ablaze in a flamboyant display of purple and gold, Ibrahim and Aminata sat on a bench in front of the restored hut that had once been their home. Below, village children played, their laughter rising like a gentle melody toward the darkening sky. "Do you mind if people start calling me your son now?" Ibrahim asked, his voice soft. Aminata smiled, her eyes reflecting infinite peace and fulfillment. "You've always been my son, Ibrahim. In my heart, nothing has ever changed." They sat there side by side, silently contemplating the timeless landscape of their native land, united by a love that had transcended time, oblivion, and separation. A president and a former cleaner, brought together by fate in a story that now touched the heart of an entire nation. And in the gentle evening breeze, it seemed the spirits of the ancestors whispered their approval, celebrating this triumph of love over social conventions, of memory over forgetting, of gratitude over indifference. The story of Ibrahim and Aminata would soon become a modern legend in Burkina Faso, taught in schools as an example of the beauty of human bonds that transcend social barriers and the transformative power of recognition. For as Aminata often said with her characteristic simple wisdom, it is not power that makes a man great, but his ability to acknowledge those who helped him stand tall.